Upon starting the engine, we're going to adjust the needle to be extremely rich, but we're going to lean it down so it'll keep running when you disconnect the glow igniter. We're not going to worry about the RPM right now. We're just going to keep it running very rich, since this is a ringed engine and we want lots of lubrication going through the motor, and not to get too hot, but to come up somewhat up to temperature. Once we get the engine running, I like to open the carb wide open and control the RPM by the high-speed needle. So we're going to richen it up to reduce the RPM and get lots of lube through the engine, and then you can lean it out slightly to up the RPM a bit, and back and forth, cycle that, and then we will close it eventually and let it cool off. The easiest way I find to kill the engine is just to pinch off the fuel line and let it stop, and then leave it for 5 or 10 minutes to sit and just come back to room temperature. After some running is accumulated, some run time, I like to start trying to lean out the low end needle, very, very small amounts, maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of a turn of the adjustment screw. We'll check the transition while the engine is warm, and kind of ease up on it with small adjustments. Every time you run the engine, you can check it a few times. Eventually it'll get into a clean transition, and the more time the engine accumulates, the more reliably it'll idle and transition into a mid and high speed run. Again, we're just going to make sure the engine is warmed up by running at higher RPM, and then we can reduce the RPM with the carb and check the idle, check the transition. The more the engine accumulates runtime, the smoother this will get. And also, if you lean out the bottom end in very small increments, you usually won't overshoot and get too lean. Just leaning out the bottom end slightly again. If you're not sure if the high-speed needle is set too close to peak or on the lean side, you can do a pinch test where you just quickly pinch the fuel line and let it go. You don't want to kill the engine, but if the engine increases RPM somewhat, you can just tell by the sound, or if you want to use your tach, you can. You know you're still on the rich side. Just give it a slight pinch and let go. Keep checking the transition as you come up to the optimum setting on the high-speed needle. Again, make sure the engine is warm before you try to check the transition. If the engine is cold, as in just started, you can't expect a smooth or reliable transition. Keep checking the transition as you come up to the optimum setting on the high-speed needle. Again, make sure the engine is warm before you try to check the transition. If the engine is cold, as in just started, you can't expect a smooth or reliable transition. Once you get close to optimum settings, I prefer to use a tach versus just the sound of the engine. It's pretty hard to hear hundreds of RPM change depending on your ears, of course, but it's always more accurate to use a tachometer, so you don't get the engine set too lean. Keep checking the transition, make small adjustments, and as you accumulate more time on the engine, it should improve to the point where you should be satisfied with how the engine behaves. Once you're done running the motor for the day, you should always pull the fuel line, let it stop, reapply the glow ignition and run it dry. Use some after run oil. There's lots of product out on the market. Lots of people who make their own. I prefer to use the small bottles you can purchase at the hobby shop. But as long as you get some oil into the carb and let it distribute through the engine to save the bearings and other steel parts from getting rusty. With accumulating break-in time, you can vary the RPM of the engine by opening and closing the high-speed needle valve with the carburetor left to wide open. Sometimes it's easier to get it started if you shut the carb to maybe a third to half. But when it's running, open the carb and use the main speed adjustment to vary the RPM up and down while you're letting the engine accumulate some more runtime.